Hey, good evening, colleagues, and welcome to the 39th edition of the Tourism Online Forum series in September 2024. And we are very delighted to have you joining us for this enlightening event, which is hosted by the Center for Advanced Tourism Research, CATS, at Hokkaido University. And this is your host, Mo. And for tonight's session, it's indeed an honor to have Dr. Dominic Lapointe to share his recent research about the sugar shacking in the Maples territory. And Professor Dominic Lapointe, PhD, is a professor in the Department of Urban and Tourism Study at the University of Montreal. And he holds a clarity research. I can't read French. What is
So,
that?
so it's
Yeah.
char de recherche in
Mhm.
social spatial
Okay.
dynamics of tourism type thing.
Okay. He is apparently, thank you. Apparently the leader of this group of research. And also Dominic is chairing of the Critical Tourism Study in North American Conference in 2020. And he is the head editor of the chief of the journal Tiros, right?
Yeah,
How to pronounce the rest?
it's
Yeah.
the
Mm,
Theoros. It's
mm.
the first and oldest journal in tourism studies in the French
Wow.
language. Yeah, it's
Okay.
42 years old now.
Since the summer 2020. And his work explores the production of tourism space and its role in the capitalist system expansion and its biopolitical dimensions. Its latest research look at climate change, social innovations, indigeneity, and critical perspective in tourism study. And it's time right now is a 5:30 a.m. for him. So it's a very a deep appreciate for making this offer to joining our tourism online forum. And please note that this online lecture will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel of the Center for Advanced Tourism Research. So now let's invite Dominic Sensei to share his lecture, and please leave your comments and question below in the Q&A box. We also offer the subtitle caption generating. So we already switched our language in English. Please check the subtitle function if you are needed. And thank you very much. Now the floor is yours, Dominic.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Good morning and good evening. Um, like Mosan said, I'm Dominic Lapointe from Montreal. And today, actually, I will talk about, I would say, the lighter side of my work in tourism, where usually, I'm more situated in critical perspective, looking at capitalist expansion and some Foucauldian, I would say, political dimension of it. So I wrote quite a bit on those things in French and in English. But in the conversation with Mosan about the lecture, he was asking me about something closer to cultural tourism and ethnic dimensions of tourism development. And so I decided to present some work I'm doing on a really particular activity is the sugar shacking that we could call it. You'll see some of the translations might be a little, I would say, funny because I'll be talking about a cultural phenomenon that is quite geographically and culturally situated, that have its own language type thing. So making it going across English, and even if you have like subtitle and everything, might sometimes get a little, I would say, particular. Just to give a little context to the research, do you know the maple syrup? Which is that like golden, really sweet syrup that tastes, I don't know, that hard to describe, that is coming from Canada. Over 70% of the production of that, that golden liquid is coming from the province of Quebec, where I actually live. And it's coming from a really, like a kind of a narrow strip around, along the maybe 1,000 kilometers on each side of the St. Lawrence River, mostly on the southern shore. And it's associated in the spring with a certain amount of cultural activities that goes with the production, but also the consumptions of the maple derived product. So during the pandemic, and Quebec had a series of quite hard lockdown with curfew, and I was like sitting in my home, which is in an area where there's quite a bit of of sugar production, of maple sugar production and maple syrup production. And it was the time to write a grant proposal for research. And after having like 2 sets of traveling for research and conference canceled, I was wondering what kind of, what I could do in terms of research that I could do basically almost traveling by foot from my house, And then I wrote a really daring project on sugar shacking, on the activities of being in the wood, tapping trees and eating together sugar, maple sugar sub-product, and how it interplay with the tourism industry. So I'll start to share my screen to show you some images. So here is what we can call a sugar shack that you can see in the back. And I would like also to acknowledge that research project right now is going with a whole, I would say, crew of young researcher, with another colleague of mine in the university, but also 4 PhD and master's students who all work together on this because it's really exciting and fun project, because it's something that's really close to, our some cultural practices that people happen, but also that is shared with tourism in different ways. So let's go through it. I would play a little video. It's like 40-50 seconds. That is about, that kind of resume quite well what happened in those moments in the spring where we get together to eat the maple syrup and the maple toffee. So make sure your headphones are not too loud or not too, adjust your sound so it don't pop in your ear. I don't want to hurt anyone's ear, and here it goes. Oh, yeah.
Come with me to a traditional Quebecois sugar shack. Despite what it may seem, it's springtime in Quebec, and that's when maple sap is harvested to be turned into syrup and other maple treats. The process of making maple syrup in a sugar shack involves tapping maple trees in late winter or early spring when the sap begins to flow. The sap is collected in buckets and throughout a network of tubes and then boiled down in large pans over wood-fired stoves. This process gives maple syrup its distinctive flavor. The cabane à sucre became not just a place for syrup production, but also a gathering place for communities. Families and friends would come together during sugaring off season to enjoy meals featuring maple syrup, such as pancakes, ham, beans, and desserts like maple taffy on snow, or tire sur neige, as we say in French. Some sugar shacks also offer activities like horse-drawn sleigh rides, live music, and tours. Visiting a cabane à sucre is one of my favorite springtime traditions.
So here is what sugar shacking is about. It's a very quick introduction. So why we are interested in, people producing sugar with trees and gathering together to eat it? Well, first of all, 70% of the world production of this amazing product is coming from the province of Quebec, where I do live. Also, it's tourism-wise, it's really interesting because it's at the intersection of an ecological niche because you need really particular conditions to be able to have the the maple water. That's something we need to correct from that video. Well, we didn't produce. It's not the maple sap that we're tapping. It's actually water that the tree bring up in its trunk before the sap start to flow. So to explain the biological process, at that time soon, when the tree will start, just before it start to drop its leaf, it will start to build up in its roots minerals and sugar that is kind of a reserve for the spring. And in the spring, when we get the moment where we have the, it thaws during the day because it's warm and you have the sun, and it still freeze during the night, because it's get colder. That create a movement of that water within the trunk, and that's where we kind of sample part of that with, either tube or pail, which is the older traditional way. So you need to have the trees, which is really particular trees. It's the maple, it's the sugar maple or the red maple. I, save you the Latin, the Latin name of those trees. But those trees can grow up, like the maple, I think the maple trees, the maple, the sugar maple tree, sorry, it's a little early. The sugar maple tree range goes south almost to Virginia, while the red maple range growing goes south almost all the way to the Gulf of Mexico in Alabama. You need to have that freezing, thawing moment in the spring to be able to tap the water. And that is a really particular ecological niche that is mostly along the St. Lawrence River in Quebec and in the mountain of Vermont, Maine, and northern New York, and a little bit, in what we call Eastern Ontario. So it's really like we could call that a sweet spot in the Northeast of America. So in Quebec, there's a lot of cultural heritage associated to it, with the production and the consumption of the maple syrup and sugar, and we call that la tradition du temps des sucres, so the tradition of sugar time. And now it's listed as a cultural heritage by the government of Quebec. There's but there's a whole apparatus associated with it, that it's unique. And it's not that present in the tourism promotion material. So that's something particular. We have like a niche product, and it's mentioned, we show it, but we don't, fully sell it as a tourism experience or product. But what's interesting also as a research perspective, it's also a translation of a relationship with the maple trees, that come from time that's before white European settlers settling of the area. So how the trees make sugar. So basically we're tapping it. You can see in here, you have like those two pail, piercing a little hole, putting a little tap, and then we have like the little hook to put the pail. It's the alternate between freezing and thawing, and we have like two trees. Like I explained, even if those trees can grow quite more south, they are not, if they don't have the thawing, you cannot make the maple syrup. We're using a Deleuze Guattarian, inspired by Gilles Deleuze, thought apparatus for research called the assemblage theory. Why we're using it, particularly what we call the territorialization, deterritorialization process. I won't repeat those two words all the time because they are hard to say. But those process, it's about the fact that, you know, assemblage, complex getting together of different phenomenon will be in movement, you know, and those assemblage will, you know, will transform, will become free of it, you know, of its part. It will, what we call lines of flights, and through those lines of flight, they will move and recompose themselves with different parts and quality. So we have different set of knowledge that are set in movement. So we work the methods within the same principle. So we'll work with literature and archival work. We'll also extract from the internet images and discourses from actual sugar shack and from destination management organization. We're doing interviews in situ. Up till now, we have like 3 interviews that are done, but we're also doing like observation at events, at festivals type things that are made around the idea of sugar shacking, at getting together, eating the sweet stuff, but also that are actually happening in an urban context, so far from the trees and far from the actual territory where it happened. So we have a lot of heterogeneous material that we're bringing together. And as a team, like I tell you, we're like 6 people working on that. We create those exchange moments where we kind of thread together elements of those, you know, heterogeneous material to see how it makes sense. So the first, I would say, assemblage that we see historically in time, it's from the trees to the food, you know? So we have a process of coding, decoding, recoding, what's happening about those trees and their capacity that we have to make sugar with it. And so before colonization, for indigenous people in that area, they are the one who actually show to the white settler how to do it, you know, and actually shows that those trees could produce that sweet water, and that it can be reduced into some kind of a syrup that you can keep for a kind of a longer time because of the amount of sugar in it, and the fact that maple syrup is really hard to ferment. It takes really long before starting fermenting because of what's in it, the minerals that are in it. So the indigenous people will actually boil it outside, and they would use a mix of freezing and boiling to actually reduce it to some kind of a syrup. And the boiling was before what was made on trunk bark pots, that we can say, over fire, but also with hot stones that were put in it. So being really hot, they would like steam out and reduce the amount of water, so concentrate the sugar. With colonization, you know, white settler brought the iron pot, and it will end up being boiled outside. But also what happened with colonizations is it quite fast got turned into a commodity and was entangled with commercial, mostly fur trade routes in North America. So the European trading companies, colonization trading companies like the Hudson Bay companies, the 100 Associate companies, they would end up buying maple sugar, which is even more concentrated, to the indigenous people to, you know, give for food to the fur traders during the winter, because the boats who would bring sugar from, I would say, the South Caribbean would not be able to come over during the winter because the St. Lawrence will freeze. So, but then we invented the evaporator, which is in the video, the big steel pan that can evaporate, that have like a really large surface that can evaporate a lot of water, you know, at the same time, which was put inside in a shack. you know, in a small house, wooden plank house. So it will kind of deterritorialize the whole production to reterritorialize it inside a little house. What it creates, that, you know, reassembling of and recoding of the production. First, it marginalized the indigenous origin of the product. For indigenous people, the tree is a kin, it's part of the family. So it kind of removed that relationship for white settlers, and then turn it into a mean of productions that actually give the water. And what's important, it's how we transform it. It also allowed for settlers to kind of put into that production their own frame of understanding and their own culture, and bringing it as something cultural for them. You know, my ancestors, that's what they did. They, in putting the production inside the shack, they kind of reframe the whole production within their cultural system. So, but also from the trees to the food, it's in Quebec, it's really particular compared to other places, you know, like Vermont or New York. Maple production is linked to food tradition beyond producing the actual sugar and maple syrup. It's a major recoding because the sugar season traditionally in Quebec, French-speaking white settler are from Catholic descent, and the Catholic, you know, practice and church was really important in our cultural life up to the 60s, where, you know, there was I would say religion was kind of abandoned by a lot of French-speaking Quebecers. But then sugar season happened around Easter season, and so sugar season and the sugar shack is as a food, that the maple product as food are associated with the breaking of the Lent fasting just before Easter. So it's during before Easter, there's a 40 days fast for Catholic, where they restrain on food, they restrain on fat food, they restrain on sugar. They end up like eating less. They eat, you know, mostly fish, and they won't eat, especially they won't eat pork. Also, traditionally, in you know, homesteading, settling time, usually around spring, there's no more pork left from the fall to eat. So it's really associated with breaking that the fast, and so it's like eggs, it's like fat, it's like pork, and it's a lot of food because people were breaking the fast. And you know, the whole traditional meal that is called associated with the maple syrup and the maple sugar time is being recoded in Quebec through that moment. And the funny thing is, now that is something that is like commercial, and you can pay and go to those sugar party, and that is also sold to tourism. Prior to you know, prior to World War II, it was not that way. And we found in the archive in 1942, the Rural Women Association of Quebec, we call them Le Cercle des Fermières, was publishing in their bulletin a note on sugar season, and mentioning that for urban families, you know, to have access to that really interesting moment, well, you need to still have relatives, you know, in the countryside. So that was like a strong divide and a strong marker of rural life, and who was still having link to rural life. But that will change after World War II, because during the World War in Canada, sugar, cane sugar and beet refined sugar was rationed, but not maple sugar. So there was a wave of investment to kind of proto-industrialize that industry, to make it going from, you know, a small pail for little family production to a larger production. So farmers could have like that side revenue, but also people could have access to more form of sugar, because the white refined sugar was sent over to Europe for the war effort. So That's really interesting, because that kind of transformed into a semi-industrialized way. And a lot of what is considered as traditional in terms of the maple production, about the equipment, and about the you know, the I would say the democratization of maple sugar consumption, come from that period. And it's not that ancient, you know. So, but then the war, finished, and then as other type of wartime production when being transformed to peacetime production, you have all those people, who have equipment producing maple sugar. And then in 1952, which is not that far away, we have the Ministry of Quebec of Agriculture publish a document that will end up transforming that idea of maple sugar making and sugar party, where basically they say, after the World War, we have like flux of American tourists with their car, that post-war middle class that have access to cars, who actually drove up to Quebec to see a traditional society. And I put it in brackets, that's really important. That was their vision of a traditional society that is from a different culture than the, I would say, Anglo-Saxon main culture in North America, because we're speaking French, we're Catholic, we're having different practices, cultural practices. So for the American, it's something that's really kind of exotic, close by, they drive there. So the government kind of give incentive to farmers to actually build those sugar house closer to the roots, to the roads that would become eventually highways, where the American tourists use to go visit, the Laurentian north of Montreal, the Gaspésie Peninsula in the eastern side of Quebec. And so we have like that movement of of bringing closer to the roads, to the tourist roads, those places where sugar happen. And the idea, it's once again, it's nothing new. That's something we hear a lot still today. The argument is to diversify the revenue stream of farmer that have like sugaring activities. So we start to have a new geography of sugar shack that start to happen in the 52. And you'll see, I'll show you a map in a couple of minutes that still have quite an impact in our sugaring practice and geography to these days. So that creates what we call a movement of deterritorialization of the tourism sugar shack, that re-territorialize it, bringing back on the land, but closer along the tourism mobility. This movement also will end up slowly but steadily deruralizing in some way the tourism along it, the sugar shacking along its leisure dimension, and especially about the food leisure dimension. So it creates a distance slowly. We have like the bulk production of maple syrup and the experience of the food and the production through the sugar shack start to move apart. It recode the sugar party experience, with the traditional music and people sitting along big table, along the expressive dimension of food. What become important is not as much the sugar grove, the maple sugar grove, but the getting together and eating food, that particular food of that moment, with the maple syrup. So, and we see that it's really particular to Quebec, because in Vermont, the production of maple syrup has been developed a lot along a farm to table idea of niche food production, and not along, cultural music and party eating other stuff with maple syrup. But also in Vermont, we don't have a barely have bulk production of maple syrup. So to buy maple syrup in Vermont, you really mostly have to go to the farm, exchange with the farmer. So we're more on a farm experience than a cultural, I would say, festival moment. You know, so we have like, as you can see, we have different assemblage within different cultural groups. So, but this movement is still active today. So today we still see that disjunction between production and cultural tourism activities. So as you will see, sugar shack, tourism sugar shack are mostly around Montreal in the the near rural area, while 50% of the world production is in one region, but that region have only 8, I would say, listed tourism main activities, sugar shack. So, and now we see more and more urban events. So actually in the city, in Montreal, on the street, sugar shack theme party or festivals that are totally deterritorialized from the site of production. So if you look at the map here, you see that's Montreal. Half of the population, Quebec's, the province of Quebec, it's nearly 8 million people. And so within that circle here, you have like 3.5, 3.6 million inhabitants. Everybody else is spread along. So you see, a lot of the tourism sugar shack are around Montreal here, when 50% of the production happened here, And if you look at that map, those like green distribution here like that are where actually the main productive groves of maple trees are in the province. So if we go to the other ones, it would be that area here like this, the area here like that, and then you can have like here you have like a lot of production, and climate change is pushing the production north here and east here. And so when we see that, the main is around Montreal. And to give you an idea, Belleuil here, Chambly, Saint-Eustache, Mascouche, those are like suburbs of Montreal with like trains to go work, and people commuting. So we're really at the edge of where the suburb become, a mix with suburbia and rurality, and then the near rural area. That's where you get the main, I would say, the main tourism sugar shack, when the bulk production is mostly in here like that, where you have like very few, little bit here, a sugar shack, but nothing like those areas. So here's what we buy in the stores, and I want you to look at the image, which is a depiction of the idea of traditional production. That's again, that image was set as the main image for putting it in a can and selling it in 1954. It's really recent, and that's really interesting, because in Quebec, 90% of the sold bulk maple syrup is sold in that can, which is kind of associated with tradition, with quality, and with the real thing. But then that can was designed in the 50s, so it's not that traditional. The product that's in it is not produced with horses and pail anymore, because it's bulk production. But also, anyone can buy the empty can if you have the machine to actually close the can. You know, it's not something that is set with rules and everything. I can tap a couple of trees on my property, go buy a couple of cans and put it in the can and, you know, sell it. So it's kind of a social construction of something that goes with quality and tradition, which is not guaranteed. The other thing is everywhere else in the world, we sell the syrup, the maple syrup, within a glass jar where people can actually see the liquid. So you can see that's cultural differences. So today, as we speak, we see 3 recoding of the Sugar Shack. You know, you have like an heritage and tradition coding, which when we look at the websites and the that is really important, where they look, you know, and they situated within the traditions, but then enacting images and equipment that are mostly from World War time and early post-war era. There's a lot of outdoor leisure coding, you know, as sugar shacking is associated with fat and heavy food. During the pandemic, people looking for outdoor, a lot of tourism and leisure sugar shack areas been recoding it along, yeah, but it's a time to be outside. You know, it's easy to have the distance. You can do some small hiking. You can do some horse carriage ride. You can do snow showing or ski around. So there's been a lot of recoding about that outdoor leisure wellness, I would say, discourses in the maybe 5 or 6 last year. But then the most important part, it's been bringing to the gastronomy discourse, the food tourism discourse, through a lot of reframing through food. And the food code is really important. And that's what it's bringing it more and more deterritorialized from its site of production. So what we see in those process is that we have like first a othering process that is decoding the tree. The tree that was akin for indigenous people start to move away from the actual sugar shacking experiment, you know? So to the point where today we end up having urban sugar shacking experience and festival that actually mimics the tapping of the tree on trees that have nothing to do with maple, because they are happening in an urban context, but use the code of the tradition with faking the pail and the tapping on trees that you don't tap, that are in urban parks. They will use the traditional codes of the checkered, you know, tablecloths, of the checkered vest, that is the traditional vest of you know, of lumberman and sugarer, and you know, so you have like that deterritorialization of the maple tree. So then the thing is, you'll have a reframing, you know, a reterritorializing of it that will, you know, kind of invisibilize the indigenous practices, the indigenous traditions, and that will reframe it inside the sugar shack within the culture of white French Canadian settlers, that will recode it within the Catholic tradition, within the breaking of the fast around of Easter time, and also around, you know, their music, their dancing, their storytelling that happened within the sugar shack. So then you get a third reterritorializing process that bring it within the tourism system, that move the shacks away from bulk production and trying to make it closer and closer to the main roads and highways for tourism, bringing and that moving away from the grove and up making the food more important. So it's more and more a food experience, and the culture, it's through the food experience and the food coding, and less about, you know, the traditional relationship with the land, with the trees, and with the practice of making it. So what we see is that through tourism, an experience associated with a very particular ecological niche, that is something that is not considered as being mobile, is reassembled through its expressive dimensions, the thing that express culture, that express spring, and it's being deterritorialized, moving it into something that can happen as a year-long experience, that it's not linked to its ecological condition anymore. For instance, there's one of and that's my last slide. One of the part of the tradition is you cook the maple syrup a little longer, so it become a little thicker, and then you pour it on really cold snow, so it makes some kind of a soft toffee that's really good. And with climate change, but also with the fact that tourism season, it's not at the end of February, in the middle of the March, end of February up to middle of March in Quebec, which is really low season in terms of tourism. So to be able to have the experience for tourism visitor in the summer, for instance, a couple of sugar shack now, what they do, they freeze plate of marble stones, and they would pour the liquid on top of a really cold marble stone, so it kind of create the same kind of toffee, but then you don't need the snow anymore. So and what I think can be learned about tourism, what it says about tourism, tourism have a really strong capacity to commodify cultural traditional practices along its expressive qualities, that it can kind of disassemble from its material, part of the material practices and the material condition. So something that is really associated with a particular place, that is really place-based in terms of tradition, in terms of practices, in a couple of 100-year process of, othering of the trees, othering of the tradition, framing it within consumption, commodification process, end up in tourism as something that is not as linked to the land anymore, and that can have its link to the land in expressive material, like images or couple of artifact that is mimicking the tradition and can be moved along where tourists go. So I will close with that, and I will welcome questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic Sensei. It's fascinating first of all, fascinating to see a 5 a.m. early morning lecture and watch the sun just rising behind your window. Yeah. I think now is the time for giving questions. And you can either raise up your hand or leave in the Q&A box. And normally people are shy here. Yeah. So before we have a question coming, I will go first. I really interested with the assemblage theory by Deleuze and Guattari, or if I pronounce it right, and also how you adapt this theory, the territorialization and the deterritorialization under the tourism kind of way of thinking, also with a little bit of geographical thinking. I think. Yeah, I think it's how fascinating this kind of colonialize turn it into a commodity. I think you use a perfect example from a sugar shack. That make me think about Hokkaido, which also share similar characteristic in compare with Montreal and Quebec. It's also winter forest here, and a lot of traditional kind of a culture now is extremely reassembled into tourism attractions. And I think not just maple syrup, is also some similar thing happening in Ainu community is now more about this kind of a symbolic reminding through the tourism commodification process. So I would like to know more a little bit about the assemblage theory in
Yeah.
tourism study, because we are only heard about one case study from your research, but in general, how we can think about assemblage theory into tourism study in general. I would like to hear more a little bit.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a really good question. I focus more on, presenting the evolution of the transformation of the of the sugar shacking process than on the actual theory, because that would have taken quite a bit of time. I will put, there's a book chapters that will come out on this, that is talk has been based on where we explain a little bit more about the theory. I put it in the chat the name of the book that will be coming out. It's edited by Lucia Tomasini. It's the space of human and non-human actors in tourism future, where we actually we write about the maple tree being, at the core of the kinship, was akin into indigenous cosmogony. It's part of the family to end up being, a mean of production that can be, not even close to where we actually do the cultural practices for tourist and urban dweller. So let's read this. The strength of assemblage theory to look at tourism, and the handbook, the second edition of the Handbook of Tourism Geography, have 2 chapters on assemblage theory, one by me and one by Elena Briasoulis, if I say her name right. So this book is coming out soon. I know Mo have a chapter 2. So that's another place where you can find more. But the thing with assemblage theory, it allows to look at really heterogeneous, I would say, material and phenomenon, and see how they are like intertwined, and they kind of play together, not in a static way, but in a really active way, And the thing is that tourism, I really like to say that, and I wrote about that, but mostly in French. But then I think I have a chapter that actually brought part of that. Ultimately, what tourism consume, it's not what they buy.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the tourists are consuming place and atmosphere and culture, but they end up to be able to consume that. They buy meals, they buy plane tickets, they buy train tickets, they buy hotel room, and so tourism even as a consumption phenomenon is much more complex than an offer and a demand, And I give an example to my students in class where I live, when you look outside at the sun rising, I live in the rural area, an hour drive away from Montreal, an hour commuting, either drive or bus. So I'm jumping in a bus after the conference to get to the university. I live in a really rural area, and close to where I live, actually on the rural road, I can see it from my house, there's a farmer neighbors who grow sunflowers. And during the week that all the sunflowers are, in bloom, that sunflower field become a tourist attraction, a tiny one. Maybe there's 10, 15 people every day who will stop by. They will set up a way so people can look and take picture without going, without being destroying the field. And all of a sudden, the field in front of my house become a tourist attraction. And because I live in a traditional historical house, people end up taking picture of my house too. So how can I look at that? And why I give that example? Because it's a really simple example. During 1 week, people come to take pictures, and some of them are tourists. And all of a sudden, some traces of traditions on the rural road become also kind of touristified. I'm brought into a tourism assemblage that is moved way beyond that field of sunflowers, you know. That sunflower field is to make, you know, biologically produced sunflower oil, but then it's brought into tourism because people bike, people do motorbiking, people do, you know, they will drive between one area to another. We have like some historical site close by, some nature site. It's not the big tourism system, but it's part of it. And all of a sudden, it's assembled during a week in the tourism system, also through social media. So it's assembled too within social media. And after a week, it's disassembled from it. And no one stopped taking picture of my house anymore. So what assemblage theory make us understand, it's how, you know, we can have, like, we call that a line of flight that goes into tourism. And and in the last 5 years, it went from people taking pictures, putting it on social media and people searching for it, to people actually interacting with the field in ways that the farmer didn't like. But this year they actually, you know, plan some little space, put some sign explaining, and they also put a way so tourists could make donation to a local NGO that help people in need. And you know, all of a sudden, from farming, it get assembled with social media, with tourism, with community work, and then back to normal. So what assemblage theory allow us is to actually see how, you know, all those side phenomena are brought into tourism, sometimes, you know, in a really small moment, but that line of flight is sent, you know, and then it's still built. And there's like some coding with, you know, with expressive material. All of a sudden, you know, you have like those pictures of the sunflowers. And then, and why I talk about the sunflowers and not the maple, because it's really new, and it's really an easy one to see. Because when we opened the assemblage, when we started to, I would say, look at the different threads that maple sugar was assembling with culture, with land, with culture, with mobility, we end up in a lot of complexity. So we have like expressive material, you get, you know, you have expressive quality to the phenomenon, you have material quality to the phenomenon, and all those two are moving and are coding and recoding the process, and then which, you know, send lines of flights, and those lines of flights, you know, kind of move all the time. And how this movement goes, that's what we can see. So all of a sudden, it makes the analysis of the tourism phenomenon still place-based, but also we can see how, you know, tourism and capitalism, through the commodification by tourism, try to always free itself from the land, from the materiality, to bring lots of expressivity that you can add, that you keep having value added within the expressivity. So now some people are trying to create some kind of a terroir, expressive dimension, through some materiality of the land, of the maple sugar production, to actually create more distinction that can create more money in the market, even if some other materiality through biological, you know, science is saying, when wherever the sugar is made, we don't see difference in the product like we would see, for instance, in wine, with different, I would say, terpene or different minerals that gets within it. So we have like all those movements where materiality and expressivity kind of goes one in hand, like the land and the capacity to free from the land. Deleuze and Guattari will always say, you know, you get the plane of, you get the immanent plane of existence, which is the total freedom from everything, from our materiality, the freedom for our land-based life. But then you always have sections of this plane that are the territory where actually we're brought back into the material condition of existence, and all, you know, expressivity and materiality all this time moving together, coding and recoding each other. So that's kind of, and we can see it with in the talk I've given today, that coming from something where, you know, people would say you need to live in the rural area where that things happen and still have strong link to people there to have access to it, to a time now where we actually close a street downtown Montreal in a really dense populated area and mimic a sugar shacking moment with the food, with the music, with the particular tablecloths, with the drinks, and call it a sugar shacking experience, you know, where you don't need to have any link with rurality. It's not even in the rural anymore. So we have all that is moving together and still producing, reproducing, territorializing, deterritorializing, reterritorializing.
Wow, wonderful. It sounds like you are using this theory to explain a complex, interchangeable rural system, right?
Yeah.
Rural-urban linkage.
Yeah. And that's also what's really interesting in starting to I would say to dwell in assemblage theory or in assemblage country is that it breaks the actual categories that we are used to think with. And all of a sudden, you know, what is rural, what is urban, how rurality and urbanity talk together, how they are interlinked, how they, all of a sudden, all those, like, here's the rural, here's what it means to be rural, become much more complex, much more intertwined. And we see that where we would see, where our brain will actually make clear, I would say, clear delimitation for some phenomenon, all of a sudden become much more blurry, much more moving, and it's reflecting on what are the ontological conditions of a phenomenon, you know, ontologically what it is about. And then it can also shed lights on very, I would say, hidden dimension of the assemblage that can offer I would say a whole world of possibility in their potential becoming, you know, and that's really powerful and hopeful also. So I do have quite a bit of assemblage thinking material that will be published within, I would say, the next year or so. I do have a piece on the periphery that will be published in Tourism Geography, I don't know, within the next couple of weeks, in which I bring that idea of the deterritorializing, reterritorializing process as a different way to look at the periphery. I have that book chapter on the sugar, maple sugar. I have another one on alterity and mobility that will be in the Handbook of Tourism Geography. And we're also revising a really interesting assemblage theory paper to look at the hospitality transportation nexus in the Magdalene Island archipelago. But that will come up a little more later, I guess, because we still have a lot of revision to do. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Like this can be a really theoretical guiding kind of philosophy theory to guiding all kind of similar research, not only tourism study. We
Indeed.
often see a lot of scholars, they are too deeply focused on their case studies, but most of the journal require them to refine their thinking into a theoretical level, but that's what the young scholar are really lacking of. But with your lecture combines with a little bit of critical tourism study with a little bit of political geography is really open our mind.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no other question, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned at the coding part, you have a heritage and tourism coding, outdoor and leisure coding, as well as a food and festival coding. I'm
Yeah.
very interested about the heritage and traditional coding. Is this a research method, or coding means something else in this process?
Well, when we say coding
Mm,
in a Deleuzean assemblage perspective, it's
mm,
say that the assemblage, when it kind of stabilizes, create a code that makes sense of it. And in the process of deterritorialization, there's a process of decoding, not in the sense that we understand it as, you know, reading the code, decoding, but really decoding. It's like destroying the code and recoding it in a different way.
I see.
So what we see in the tourism sugar shack experience, some there will be a coding about the tradition that kind of legitimize it within that traditional idea of tradition coding system, which is kind of a reproduction of the epinal image of what is on the can that I showed you, So you'll have the sugar shack will be painted in red, and you will have the checkered plate motif on the tablecloths, sometimes on the curtain, if there's curtain. The people working there will be wearing the red checkered vest that is associated with forest people, people working, farmers and people working in a forest in the old time. And you'll have all those code, you will have images or of those like pail that we put on the sometimes the garbage bin in the room will be made out of those pail. You'll have all those small coding. And it can go all the way to have an evaporator, which is where you put the maple water to concentrate, with the fire, that you burn the fire under. Bulk production now don't use wooden, they would use inverse osmosis to concentrate the first part, and they will use natural gas to boil it, so that's the bulk production. But if people have bulk production on one side and the cultural tourism on the other side, some will still have like a small evaporator, and some will put the actual maple water because it smells good and it looks interesting and you can do cultural interpretation. But some will even go to put just plain water into it but it kind of bring a code. It's part of the code. In the sugar shack you have the evaporator with the wood fire, so it smells like the wood, and you get a little smell of the maple, and you get the steam, but because it's not productive, it's for the show in some way, and it's to frame it within the tradition. You'll have those horseback, horse carriage riding that will use also the code of traditional horse carrying riding, but very few have the traditional Canadian horse. They will have like more recent, carriage horse. They will have, so they will kind of use all that. And what I talk about the traditional coding, it's because there's a materiality to it. And I'm not saying that all tourism sugar shack place are kind of playing and faking it, and what is interesting with assemblage theory, and I didn't talk about, when we look at the line of flights of the materiality of the equipment, that a lot of it is adapted from sugar production from south of the States and the French Caribbean, and how it was brought and adapted from maple sugar, but also the language about it. was transformed to kind of dissociate it with the way of production of that sugar that was with slavery at the, in the 19th century. So you get all those complex things that are going out. And so it make us look at the different way to see, here is the authentic heritage practice. No, we have we have moving assemblage that use different part of the code, and that sometimes decode it in different way. And when it decode and recode, it will keep. And Deleuze and Guattari will say that when the assemblage move into a decoding, recoding, deterritorializing, reterritorializing process, the recoding and the reterritorializing process will a lot of time being around some of the core dimension of the phenomenon, getting close to some part of its ontological part, even if it's moving it away from where it come from. And that's really what we see within that sugar shacking thing. And with the traditional part, so that we don't end up talking about being authentic or not, but it's how it assemble. So for some people, they will have part of the grove. For instance, some sugar shack tourism area will have the sugar shack where the sugar party happened in part of their sugar grove that they will actually tap by hand in a traditional way for something like 300 pails, which is a manageable, I would say, traditional size production, while they will have 25,000, tap on the rest of their grove with an automated systems production. And then they will actually have part of a traditional part. They will have the tourists do what we call running the pail, when you go from tree to tree and you end up, emptying the pail. And they are not more or less traditional than other people who recode it in a different way. So it brings an understanding that is different than I would say, the classical tourism management product development, where you get like how authentic it is, how we market that authenticity, and then having that debate, I'm more authentic than the other. That's not the real experience. So, going to eat the maple toffee from a marble plate in the summer, of course, part of me who did it with my grandparents when I was young, it's something that is say, maybe it's not the right traditional way to do it. You will miss something out. But in the context of climate change, of tourism and mobility, having access to it in that way, with a sensitive cultural, I would say, discussion about where it comes from, how it's made, how you should think about, how can you picture it at the end of winter, etc., etc. It's an experience that it's its value, and that is part of a different way of assembling this this kind of, I would say, experience and cultural process. And it's also seeing culture as a practice, not as a fixed, as a fixed thing. It's a practice that is moving, and that is assembling in different way, in different contexts. And it can also help to identify how commodification happened, and then bring back that very post-structuralist thinking within a more political economy look at it. Because in such an analysis, the political economy process is part of the assemblage. It's not something that is different or against assemblage thinking. For me, it's something that we bring into the assemblage, and it gives a lots of thickness to it.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much. I think the point you mentioned about what they consume and is not what they buy, it's also make me rethinking about authenticity. Yeah, because what exactly is of the authenticity then during the yeah. Okay, I think we don't have any other comments or questions coming in, and you're already apparently very exhausted. So maybe we just let you
Oh well,
take a nap for
I'm
the
running to take a bus, and I have a whole day at the university today with meetings and some teaching, and well, but I go to bed a little earlier, I would say, those days.
Okay, and thank you very much. Then I should let you back.
I'm thanking you for offering me that great moment to talk, with your students, your colleagues, and your collaborator. And I know, it's evening and it's still a holiday, not many people, but seeing from your YouTube channel, there's a lot of people watching it. So people on YouTube, thank you very much to watch it in different at a different time. And have a very good evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Dominic.
Thank you. Take care, and I hope to see you soon. It was really nice to have time with you in Ireland.
Yeah, I will